You're the Director of Outreach and Education at the Human-Centered AI Institute at the Barr College of Business at the University of Houston. That's a lot of words. Tell me what you do on a day-to-day basis.
It is indeed a lot of words, and the title's growing as I get older, so it's more and more of a handful. So I think it's more helpful for me to talk about my background and then evolve into the discussion of what I kind of do at the university. So my background, my first PhD I pursued in physics. I didn't quite complete it. I went quite far. I worked at CERN, helped them find the Higgs boson. So it was pretty successful, but I decided not to leave or stay in that field because to me, physics research isn't hugely interesting. It's kind of hard to spend every day looking at these little particles and examining phenomena that are kind of beyond human intuition. So that wasn't very satisfying for me. So then I went into economics, and well, I kind of fell in
Sorry,
love with.
before we move on, that sounds really, really cool. Did you ever get to visit like the collider, the one that everyone sees a picture of?
Yeah, yeah. So we took pictures in front of it. There's a lot of colliders. I worked primarily in Chicago in Fermilab.
Okay.
This goes into why I also left the field. So in Fermilab, I worked there for 3 years. So this is in around Naperville, Chicago, if you're familiar with the area. So I got a fellowship to go to CERN full time, but at the time I think I was like 22. So I was too young to rent a car internationally, and I'm an American. So I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I get to go to the most expensive country in the world, Switzerland, without being able to rent a car and maneuver myself. I didn't realize public transportation existed because I'm an American. And I ended up just blatantly turning down the fellowship, which didn't endear me to colleagues at my university or in the collaboration because it's kind of a prestigious honor. So that was when I was supposed to work at CERN basically for the remainder of my PhD, and then things got uncomfortable, and one of the reasons I left was because of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of cool. You can go into so the one at Fermilab, they work with what are called neutrinos that don't interact with matter, and so they're actually safe to go in the beamline where that big detector is actively working, and you can touch it, and there's no danger. For CERN, you only go in there when it's inactive after the radiation dissipates, and it's quite interesting. It's just massive. It's absolutely huge. Yeah.
Yeah, every time I see a picture of it, just the scale of it and seeing like a little tiny human next to it is just mind blowing. But sorry for that aside. I had to ask you about it. I haven't met anyone who's been in that world. So keep going. Okay, so that was the beginning of the story.
So this is the beginning of the thing, and this is where I kind of established a lot of tech-based skills. We worked with neural networks back then, as they were called, and now they're called AI. So this is where I first dove into AI, I guess, without realizing it, because I had a different name back then. And then I got interested in economics, actually through dog training. I became a dog trainer for a year, and the psychology of it turned me into this field of behavioral economics and studying human behavior. And then I did my economics PhD and absolutely loved it, and decided that's what I would do for my life. Um, and yeah, so I did that for a while, and then I decided I wanted to work on something that has a little bit more impact. The pure research side of things, from an academic standpoint, some papers have a very phenomenal impact. Most academics really only find themselves influencing the world when they dive into industry or outreach directly and try and have that connection with their own hands rather than expecting the research to reach broader audience. So I took this position here at the Human-Centered AI Institute as the director, given my background in AI and my experience teaching and kind of working with the business world. And in this role, I board research. We still perform pretty active research, pretty influential within the academic world. But more importantly, what I focus on is the outreach to companies, individuals like yourself, other educators, and just anyone that's really interested. And I try to spread the word of human-centered AI rather than the tech side of things. This is how does a person interact with AI and how does that influence what they do, it could be their emotions, their experiences. I primarily look at productivity. There's a whole spectrum in terms of what AI will um, influence in a human's day-to-day experience. And the other important thing is specifically in our institute, we don't really look at the operational implications of things like automation. It is a topic we examine, but the majority of our researchers, we kind of have this impression that AI is a tool, and it really only interfaces and becomes beneficial when operated by a human, like other tools before it. Sure, that's going to change the tasks that you may do in your job, but it's not going to replace a person. So understanding how you have a synthesis of work between the humans and the AI is really paramount, and that's what we focus on. On the education side of thing, I just started teaching a course, an introduction to AI, and we're working on expanding that program, not just within the College of Business, which is the college that I'm a part of, but within the broader community at University of Houston, because one thing that's really, really exciting is the ability for AI to create interdisciplinary opportunities for education and work from an individual because it expands like someone like me that has no artistic talent. I can create all of a sudden images or videos or whatever I want in the art space. And it also kind of has the opposite effect in that artists can come ahead and they can interact with the business world. They can do things or wield knowledge they didn't really previously have the access to, and it makes everyone just a lot more dynamic. And I feel like from an education perspective, we want to lean into that rather than separate that and have different strands. So we're still actively working on this project, seeing what form it'll take, but it's going to be quite exciting.
Yeah, so so much I want to touch on. It seems like you are working on lots of areas that I'm interested in. Just one kind of quick thing I'm curious about. Obviously, when I talk to people about AI in healthcare, there's two camps, right? One camp is that healthcare is like old, antiquated. We're never gonna, you know, use it to the full capacity that it's meant to be. The other camp is that it's going to take all of our jobs. It's like already making radiologists obsolete and it's coming for the rest of our jobs. What do the 18, 19, 20-year-olds that you teach that introductory class to, what is their general consensus and what's the feeling you get from them? Is it a mixed bag? Is it like, let's go all in? I'm just curious what they think about it.
I will say, generally across the board, everyone's scared, and
Yeah.
as a teacher, it's kind of hard to quell those fears, given in my career, I've constantly reinvented myself, and it's not an easy process. So it is a very scary concept. One thing that really helped these students is I had a guest speaker last week came in, Alicia Lawyer. So she's the founder and one of the performers in the Roco Orchestra in Houston here. These guys are Grammy Award-winning orchestra for their producing. The producer won a Grammy, I guess, for an album. I don't really know the distinction in terms of how this affects the organization won a Grammy or what, but yeah, the producer won a Grammy back in 2020. Um, they're constantly the number one orchestra for females and people of minority descent because of all these programs that she run. And so she had this really interesting career path. She was kind of classically trained. She went to Juilliard, which is like the top school in that. But she found herself in an industry where there's just not job openings. Basically, it's a 10-year system. So the only way you get a position in an orchestra is someone passes away, and it's not a great prospect. So she set outside with this kind of simple mission in that, hey, it's 2003 at that time. There's kind of a whole new world. There's opportunities for new approaches to this thing that's existed for a long time. So I'm going to take technology and I'm going to use that as our primary mission to drive and spread outreach for our music. And she did that and been phenomenally successful ever since. And this story of basically someone that found themselves into a world where there's not much job openings, but there's really ripe technological innovations to harness and create new job openings. It really excited the students, and yeah, they all started jumping on the bandwagon, trying to work on projects with Alicia, and yeah, they're actively pursuing some of those right now. But it seems like now they're saying, okay, I'm not super scared. I'm more just overwhelmed with the possibility of creating jobs and so not creating jobs, but creating opportunities for myself, capitalizing on opportunities that have come about, like the Stargate stuff with the local funding in Texas. We get 100 billion from that up in Abilene, so not too far from our neck of the woods. So these things are kind of exciting them. I'm trying to say, okay, there's going to be a lot of opportunities. You guys are the very forward-looking people, and as long as you embrace that, I think you'll do fine. It's still scary, and it takes a lot of work to reinvent yourself. And the one group that I think I am most concerned about currently are the people that are right now currently working, the people that started working in the last 10 years. This group, it seems like they would be the ones that a lot of these advents, if companies tried to replace workers and automate tasks, they would be the first to be victim to it. We have constantly seen examples of this technology does not replace people. It does not work well on its own. It needs to be overseen. Even in those applications of radiology where you're using it, you still need a person to examine the scans, right? Is that
Yeah.
the scans? And you still need someone to set the individual into the machine to get it at the right angle. So there's all these human components to it. What would be really concerning is basically as people that make these operational choices get too gung ho about this premise of automation, and they get rid of the people, and then they find that they don't actually have the manpower or the facilities to actually facilitate this move, or it's becoming incredibly ineffective, and you remove all your safeguards to adjust in that process. It's something that I think might happen. We might see some kind of growing pains in the next 5 years or so, but I imagine it's not going to hold up for the long term.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, and so I think scared definitely is a sentiment that I feel personally, and I think a lot of us feel. And I think it makes it less scary when you focus on the human-centered aspect of it and the technology augmenting us. So I think that's kind of a good thing to keep in mind. The thing that worry about in healthcare. So, for example, there's a lot of, amazing applications of AI in healthcare. One of those applications, for example, a lot of people talk about the technology a lot of EMRs are developing is like clinical decision aids and guides, right? So it sees this patient, certain complaints. It looks at a whole bunch of other similar patients, this patient's history, and it can be like, hey, this person may be having like a heart attack. These are the tests you should order. And then maybe all the doctor has to do is like, accept, I look at these tests, they sound great. And I think it's human nature that, maybe the first certain time period of that technology, we kind of take a close look at each of those orders and kind of have it under a finer microscope. And then maybe 3 years into it, you're like, okay, yep, it's been right. Like every time I've used it, I'm gonna say it's right this time. How do we make sure that new medical trainees that are coming up in this environment where these technologies are going to be readily available still have the skill to when maybe your hospital's under a cyber attack and you don't have that tool, you can actually be a doctor. How do we ensure that that happens? So because cyber attacks are a real thing, they happen all the time. How
Mhm.
how how do we ensure that we don't have doctors and providers that really don't know how to practice medicine because they become so dependent on these technologies?
Yeah, this is a great topic. We don't want complacency basically in individuals becoming comfortable, and we also don't want that passive acceptance without continuous oversight for the suggestions. For routine processes, maybe it's, well, I don't, I have no right to say. I don't know if it's harmful or not, but I can see a situation where you develop this complacency. And well, to be honest, we don't know. We're not 3 years down the line. So
Yeah.
right now, this stuff isn't really broadly implemented into the education process, but that doesn't stop students from using it, right? Using it to the benefit themselves, and experimenting with it for their own production. So, I guess we'll see. We have to see
We'll
there.
see. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, on the cybersecurity thing, I know this is a massive concern, and we do have like a lot of our technical people, rather than working on like advancing maybe programming applications that are becoming kind of redundant by AI because now there's a much easier way to talk to a machine rather than learning a programming language. They're working on a lot of these security measures. So we have this cyber care initiative at University of Houston that specifically looks at preventing cyber attacks for self-driving cars and enhancing the security. Um, but yeah, in terms of complacency, let me think a moment. There may be more I can say about that in
Yeah,
that
maybe
regard.
maybe we'll come back to it here in a little
Yeah.
bit. The other thing that I think is really unique is that you were at the University of Houston. You obviously deal with healthcare organizations, other corporations, many large organizations that are now implementing these technologies or thinking about implementing these technologies. Where do you see them? Where, like, say you're sitting across from like a organization head, where do they get most interested when they talk about these technologies and want to implement them. I imagine cost saving is a big part of that, but where do their energies and interests peak when you're having those conversations with them?
Yeah, so there's a lot of topics it covers. Quality of service is actually one that continuously comes up, is ensuring quality with an AI overseer. So this could be things that are quite easy to implement, like having a device for compliance with laws for like cold callers for telemarketers. They have to say, like legally this is recorded. Hey, I'm trying to sell you something. And you can implement kind of an AI voice bot to check the telemarketer to make sure they're saying these things before they make these calls, or sorry, not before they make these calls, but as the introduction for the clients. So ensuring quality of service is one pretty important one. And this is a way that's not replacing people. So it's not going to be met with some sort of backlash in that I'm replacing workers. No, I'm just making the workers kind of better at their jobs. Training is another, where they're training personnel without using senior personnel's time. So having an AI that has been trained on the data for that company that can go through some common procedures as you might have is I don't know how it would work for a resident, so I can't say there, but some common procedures as someone that like comes in as a sales agent might interact with. Like these are the common questions that customers will have. This is what's been successful. We can go through an example conversation between you, a worker that's new, and an AI that's trained on the interactions people have had with customers, and you can experience those difficulties or problems firsthand prior to actually having it affect yourself in a dynamic environment. And yeah, these are really nice. The other benefits, I mean, automation is constantly a topic that comes up. It is something that people really want to do. I really caution away from it. One, it's not in my research, and two, if you leave one of these AIs on their own, any form of generative AI, it's very simple for it to cascade into chaos and be extremely problematic and detrimental rather than beneficial. So I tend to just caution people immediately away from that. If you're talking about automating routines in like an assembly line or something like that, that's fairly simple. But I mean, these guys don't need to come to us to ask those questions. So typically, it's trying to interact with personnel is what we handle. But yeah, anything that comes up with automation, when I say no, you want to just expand the capabilities of the workers you have rather than try and eliminate them with technology. Mm,
Yeah. There's a lot of healthcare companies that are doing, for example, post hospital discharge follow visits with like virtual nurses and whatnot, or following up and making sure that you're taking the medications at the doses that you are. And a lot of these programs are, they're not widely rolled out. They're kind of in trial programs or maybe internally being tested. In some of these programs, for example, these training examples that you shared, what is your personal feeling on how mature these are? Do you think they're ready for, like a training environment, like they're fully there, or they still have like another year or two of growth that needs to happen, or somewhere in between?
Many of these are really well designed from a user interface perspective. A lot of these AI tools are just getting embedded into existing platforms that people that are maybe less experienced in business, small businesses particularly, can use. So companies like Visita already had this sort of business landscape dashboard where you can work on like marketing, accounting, HR all in one place. And they've added AI tools, AI agents to help their customers through each one of those branches. So most of these are already rolled out. The issue is it's very hard to study the effects of it. Is it actually beneficial? It's very dependent on the needs of the customer or the person using it. And it's not something that you can really take a company's word for that, hey, this is beneficial, because of course they're going to say it's beneficial.
Yeah.
So what we're really lacking to see a wide adoption of a lot of these tools that do exist and are pretty high quality from my experience. Not using them for the intended purpose, but just interacting with them and trying to break them is essentially what I do. From my experience, they're ready to roll out, but the issues in acceptance is basically there's no third-party verification of its actual impact. And the other thing is the security there. If I use one of these tools, is it going to store my data and then try and compete with me and launch its own competitive business using all the data I've fed it in, unintentionally as a training sample. So these are kind of these concerns, data privacy, and the other thing I mentioned that's eluded me. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's an interesting point you make. There's a lot of, and these technologies are out where, like, obviously doctors get lots of inbound patient messages about, hey, I'm having this side effect, or hey, you wrote this medication, can we get a refill, whatever the case may be, and that's like hours of their time. And there's like automated AI responses for those, and doctors just go through them and send them if they look okay. And they did a study, I forget where this was out of, where it really didn't save doctors time, but the doctors did say they had satisfaction in kind of the mental unburdening of actually having to write that message and whatnot. And so, like you mentioned, it's hard to measure exactly where you get the benefits. And then if it is a benefit of, like, you being not under as much stress when you're at home working on those notes versus having to compile them from zero, how do you measure that? And so, yeah, it's kind of that flux period where we're still learning that it might not be like a, hey, this is going to save you X hours, but it might be, hey, it's going to make your mental health better after work. So interesting kind of situation we're in.
Yeah, no, that's exactly a very important use cases. Limiting stress for the workers. Yeah, replacing tasks that you don't like with basically a task like just click a button, let the AI write the email. A task that you don't
Yeah.
mind so much. Yeah.
Yeah. So my kind of piggyback off of that is that every company wants to say they're doing AI, right? Every tool is an AI tool. Every feature they release is now going to be this intelligence or that or whatever the case may be. How much of what we have, like, say I'm a clinician that isn't involved in a large academic center, or I don't work for a large health tech company or whatever the case may be, and you're evaluating a product, how do you know if something is truly AI or generative AI versus is it machine learning, and is it machine learning AI as well, or is it just a set number of tasks that this thing is doing and filling a form? Like, how do you make those distinctions between all those things?
So it's pretty simple. None of it's actually AI. It's all machine
Yeah.
learning applications. There are things that get closer to kind of the science fiction prediction of AI, which would be things like reinforcement learning, like the Google's DeepMind that won the Nobel Prize towards the end of last year. So this would be something that's closer to kind of the idea of AI that you have, but all these are just applications of algorithms. All these chatbots are doing, they're not thinking, they're just kind of got an underlying algorithm for what is the most beneficial response nowadays with the way the ChatGPT and your DeepSeek are being trained. Previously, it was the most common responses in the data that they were trained on to whatever a question would be, and they're just spitting that out verbatim. So they're trying to meet user needs, and they basically have not really so complicated. It's a predefined structure for how they come up with these responses. It's just done not ad infinitum, but ad nauseum to the point that humans can't really track what's gone on to create those responses. And so there is a predetermined kind of underlying track that you could, given like enough mental capacity, wire down for these responses. And it's not thinking is what I'm saying. It's just giving you a
Yeah.
most common response or a most likely to invoke a positive feeling from the user response as you can look at now based on all the user interaction that we fed into ChatGPT over the last 2 years. So we're just not at that stage of having an AI currently. The idea behind AI is basically that it can grow on its own, that it's capable to adapt. And it's capable to adapt only with the interactions of human users to keep constantly giving it feedback so it can learn it and adjust. Without that channel, it's not going to get any better. We've seen repeatedly in publications in Science and Nature that if AIs are trained on AI content, it breaks down. It actually just starts deteriorating into nonsense. So it can't develop on its own without a human user in that chain. And that's a really, really important thing to understand because that's indicative that we're nowhere near things like is it Lauren Katz that has the singularity idea where AI starts writing code and it can constantly improve itself? Yeah, we're just
Yeah.
nowhere near that capacity. If we look at like where AI is most accurate, like you look at those charts for DeepSeek, how it kind of came in and then like marginally advanced the industry, the coding is still just like down towards like 20% accuracy. It's nowhere near even at the most simple applications of an AI creating code. So yeah, right now we have machine learning and machine learning, it's been about since the 1950s, so it's really nothing new. It's just now it's a lot more accessible. And that accessibility is the really exciting thing is, well, now everyone can start using it. And so it's not really just constrained to Oxford University PhD students that experiment with this thing. It's everyone, and it's really important that it's everyone because it can, in many aspects, use that accessibility to enhance equity. You could also see a state where if the technology is catered to specific groups in its development, it will have the opposite effect. And this is kind of inadvertently the case with the existing LLMs, at least the mainstream of them, and that they are trained on a lot of content that is heavily influenced by the white male voice, and you can see it in a lot of not even so uncommon interactions you would might have with that technology. So yeah, we're nowhere near AI in terms of what you might understand as an AI general intelligence. But we are making this thing really accessible, and that's great. As long as we have representation and people that use it, we'll continue to, as a society, build these tools to service everyone and keep improving.
Yeah, that's so just to clarify terms, so that we have like very advanced algorithms, basically machine learning algorithms. What I think most people think of as AI, it's like, oh, it's thinking on its own would be artificial general intelligence. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be the
Okay.
idea of like your Skynet sort of.
Yeah. And then what is I've heard the term super intelligence. What is that? Or is that just some term people throw around and it has no real
It depends on the context, so it could mean
yeah.
anything. Super, yeah, I don't know. It used to
It's just
mean that
kind of
you
a
could
broad
beat
term
a
people like
human.
to throw out.
It used to be like a computer that could
Yeah.
beat a human at like chess, right? So
Yeah.
when was that? In the 80s? We had that super intelligence.
Yeah.
Intelligence itself, right? This is adaptability. It's not adapting at all. It's super knowledgeable, I guess is what we would say.
Yeah.
Super functional. Yeah, so yeah, it's a misnomer. It's these buzzwords, of course, that people throw out there.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, really interesting because like you'll listen to like a podcast or watch a news clip and people like saying all these words that kind of sound like they have a lot of gravity to them and they're scary, but then you're like, how much of it is actually based in academic like root versus they like saying them. The other thing I wanted to kind of get a better grasp of is open source versus closed source AI. What does that mean?
hmm First, I want to touch on something you said there. So academic language, we have also adapted the terminology of AI to mean machine learning. So we were very quick adapters, at least in the business literature, for
Yeah.
throwing out these buzzwords as well, because we have to publish, and to publish, you have to cater a little bit to the whims of the referees and the editors and the journals that want to have their works have high impact, and so you have to use these terms as well. So we are not innocent of of that sin of using elaborate language, unfortunately. Okay, so this idea of open source versus closed source. I don't have that level of programming. I mostly, as a scientist, worked on algorithmic programming in a closed environment. But my understanding of open source is it can be contributed to and advanced by a whole group of people, anyone that has access to it. It's open source, whereas closed source is going to be developed and improved by a fixed team of engineers within a company. So an example of an open source LLM would be something like Hugging Chat that's widely available. And if you go onto Hugging Chat, it has all of the open source models on there that you can use any model to interact with it exactly as you interact with ChatGPT. So you have your Llama on there and you have your DeepSeek, which is on there as well. You also have a large number of AI assistants that are on there that are pre-tuned by other users, and they can be branched and improved further. Like you can create different versions. Like you and I, we could just go on there right now. We could create a different version of one of them and use it. Those assistants are kind of fun to play around with. They're like the Wild West. The most popular one I think is called Break GPT, which actually I'm pretty sure this is a term coined by Oliver Tobia from Columbia in his class, where he has an experiment to basically make ChatGPT discriminatory in some way. And it turns out it's not so hard for his students to have done that. But this is basically jailbroken version of ChatGPT that has no restrictions at all for what it can suggest and what it can interact with. Whereas if you go on ChatGPT, it's very fine-tuned in terms of what it's able to reply to and do. You also have some interesting ones. You have like an AI that's on there, an AI assistant. It's one of the like I think five most popular ones that's for Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. So rather than get a person that has to not partake in the fun, you use this AI to interact with them and develop the campaign. And it's quite nice. It's a really cool application. So that's the power of open source. The issue is a lot of times these tools can get what's the word for it? Changed. Like you would have Wikipedia. Wikipedia is open source. Anyone can edit that. It
Yeah.
can get changed in ways that are not always beneficial to the community. But as long as you have kind of a communal marketplace where the ratings determine what shows up, you can keep the best ones at the top and hopefully go on from there. Closed source, though, it's easier to profit from. Whereas open source, everyone has it available, so it's quite hard to generate any financial benefit from it. Closed source, you can generate this financial benefit, which may make it so that there's more ability as an individual to invest time in it. It feels more worth it, more lucrative. And so you see more effort from people that are maybe have more advanced understandings of the technology and can build better tools as a result. I think right now we're seeing that that is not actually the case with AI with this DeepSeek alternative that came about last week. So yeah, it seems right now open source is the way forward, but yeah, things have changed each week. I presented in my AI course. So each week I have a different slide that says, "Oh, recent AI news." Oh, okay, you thought last week was the big thing. This is a big thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that must be a really interesting course to teach just because like it's like the most it literally from day to day stuff's changing, it's never like, oh, I've got my set PowerPoints for the semester. I'm good.
Yeah. Constantly adjusting it. Even just yesterday, I went through an exercise using Hugging Chat. And we had basically the user guide. So like you go here, this is the snapshot of the landing board, and you click this button, and then you create an account, and then you access the machine. You choose your model here. They completely changed their interface literally this week, so it was all redundant because it was 1 week old. And yeah, luckily my students adapted, so they were able to show me how to use it, and I could show the class. But yeah, man, it is an exhausting course to teach.
I almost want to be a student in the course. Shifting back kind of to the healthcare world, my kind of most frequent interaction with AI, I guess, is ambient listening scribe technology, which I use every day in the ER now. It was introduced to our hospital system maybe 6 months ago, and it's personally saved me hours of note taking time. I probably do spend incrementally like a few minutes longer with each patient, explain stuff better to them because I'm not in as much of a rush to get back to my computer to write the note about that interaction because for the most part, these notes are very, very good. So for my kind of one work experience with it has been positive. When you look at obviously in Houston, huge healthcare city, and you look at healthcare broadly and kind of how humans are interacting with, some of the solutions and tech out there that's AI and based towards healthcare. Do you see kind of more use cases like that coming out of it where it's going to, make clinicians' lives better and allow them to do the things that they want to do, which is spend more time with patients and be that teacher to that patient? Do you see it maybe heading away from that direction? Too early to tell? Just what your broad kind of impression is of healthcare meets AI.
So this is kind of a matter of selective sample, right? The ones that you see are the ones that are actually beneficial. And that tends to be these things that have, I wouldn't say simple functionality, but very nice quality of life functionalities that are really high in their quality in terms of they're not going to create a lot of extra work for you to interact and use the technology to become better and better. Because we've had like voice to text, which is essentially what is operating with this note-taking thing, and then it's just summarizing. It's just taking a voice to text and translating it through an LLM. We've had that since I was a child, right? I think in the late 90s, we had some of
Yeah.
these transcribers. So this isn't anything new, but now it's just a lot less computationally burdensome, so that it can run. You probably run it through like something you wear, or is it through your phone? How does
No,
this
yeah,
run?
it's an app on my phone, and I, hit record, go into the patient room, and that's it. You can put it in your pocket, and simple as that.
Yeah, exactly right. So you don't need some
Yeah,
hefty machine to operate. It's not just churning up a laptop, as what I remember having a
yeah,
dentist for me as a middle schooler. So this is fantastic. Those are the ones that you really see impact workers' lives. But for every one of those, you probably have about 10 of these kind of almighty applications that are going to replace people or like do a million different things. And those on-focus ones tend to fail out and burn out pretty quickly. Um, so the most successful ones, yeah, would be tools like this that are taking existing technology and just refining it with AI. Um, you also see some applications like Oracle just had an application that they announced last week for sales teams, where you take all this data from sales teams' interactions with clients and before the sales teams goes into a meeting, you have the AI agent summarize all of these interactions. What are the client's expectations? What are the talking points you should do? Gives you the names of the people you're interacting with, the people you interacted with in the past, and just poses all the relevant information for that team so it informs them going into the meeting. This is something you could do with a simple Excel sheet that you saved for the client's name, right? But you're just kind of not automating the process, but streamlining the process that much more. And as you're streamlining it, it's just becoming a little bit lower in the difficulty to use, and that's expanding the people that are willing to invest the time to use it, a great margin, having a really nice effect. So this comes back to accessibility. You're using this technology through your phone rather than a laptop. You could have, I mean, doctors could have set this up, I guess, like 30 years ago, but it's just
yeah.
not the way that they could have done it. And now you have it, and yeah, it's making everyone's lives easier. So as long as we're focusing on things like this, it's great. The one thing I will say from a business standpoint is it's really hard to assess the like a key performance indicator for this tool on your time. We could compare it like before and after you use this tool, how much time you spent in a patient's office. And if you are tracking that, that's great. But the comparison group, right? Who are we comparing that with to say it saved OS? Say again, OAS?
Always, always, yeah,
OAS. Oh, geez. OAS. It saved OAS like 30 minutes in an 8-hour shift. And we're comparing maybe you to a colleague that's a little bit older and isn't using this technology. And compared to him, maybe you're saving this 30 minutes, but in actual time, maybe it's not actually saving you time, it's just saving you tr stress and eliminating this
yeah.
this aspect of your job that you don't like doing. So it's hard to tell because it's not an apples to apples comparison between who's adapting these tools and using them and who's not. So it's quite hard to assess the benefits, and because it's quite hard to assess the benefits, it's hard to sell these things at the proper prices. Um,
So one
now,
thing I guess I've learned from this conversation so far is, like, for example, this example of ambient listening tools, or some of the other things we mentioned, is like they basically existed for a long time, and we're just more efficient with them, and it's not necessarily like crazy AI doing all this stuff. And so the follow-up question to that is, this can be in healthcare or outside of healthcare. What's something that someone from the public is interacting with today that is like the most sold up or high, like it's the most realist AI, for lack of a better term. Like it's the most advanced thing that we as normal consumers are interacting with, that you're like, yeah, even 6 years ago probably didn't exist. I guess Chat GPT maybe, but
Hmm. Yeah, so basically on the capability side of things, what's expanded on
yeah,
the capability side of things rather than the
yeah,
accessibility side of things. You have some examples of these that have been trialed a lot, right? So you had Google Glass. You probably heard a lot about it maybe like 5, 7 years ago. We
yeah.
just made an offer to the guy, one of the guys that was working on Google Glass originally to come work at University of Houston. We weren't able to work it out, but he used to test this product. And this product is just so discombobulating for the user. it just creates so much cognitive dissonance that you can't actually use it. It was all market ready. You could have used it, it just had no benefit because this thing that basically made a smartphone for your eyes distracted you way more than it actually benefited you.
Yeah.
So there is this advanced technology. We're just not ready for it as people. It takes a long time to use these things. Um, a lot of the most advanced in terms of capability things that we're interacting with would be in oh, let's see. So I think what's it called? The headsets you wear for gaming. Is it
Like the
virtual
Vision
reality?
Pro, is that what you're thinking of? Or
Yeah, I can't like the ones where you play Beat Saber is the game where
oh yeah,
people can
yeah, like the meta
Oculus,
ones
the
and all that.
Oculus,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Those are really interesting capability terms because they can track your eye movement and your hand movement and combine the two. I'm sure there's a lot of medical tools that do that because when I was in undergrad, I helped code an eye tracking software that allowed users to interface with the screen with their eyes, and that's really cool and futuristic because it's like, okay, I can interact with this thing and it's constantly tracking my eyes. It's just not
Yeah.
useful for everyone else that isn't unable to use these things. And I'm trying to give you an answer besides just the smartphone or Tesla. So let me
Yeah.
read in my mind a little bit here in terms of the most technological thing. I would say it's not in the US, right? It's not things that we interact with, but things in like China, right, where you have malls that are all basically technology hubs that will track people's movement. And the kiosk will update to the person as they're walking by. I think this is the
Really?
where we
Wow.
have capability expanded to a high degree. It's not in the US. We're not really at the cutting edge of that side of things. It might be because it doesn't serve our markets. It could be because the way our malls function is not in a coordinated sense where it is in China and a mall in the US. I think all of the stakeholders, all the shops have separate interests. Maybe they could all come together to develop that technology and share kind of video tracking data, but because it's all individuals, it's not feasible. It could be but yeah, I think these are where you have the most advanced usage of technology, where it's really like being in a sci-fi world. There are all the implementations of technology into buildings that you see in a lot of the highly developed Chinese cities. It's really fascinating there. Yeah, we see a lot of
Yeah.
their research, so we actually get a lot of interactions with it as American academics.
That's super cool. I definitely want to go to China now and experience some of these things. Where in the grand scheme of things, and you might be biased, and that's obviously totally okay. Like we obviously had like the printing press and the invention of planes and vehicles and the internet. Would you say AI fits into that category? Not necessarily, the accessibility things, but where things are headed over the next 5 to 10 years and how it's going to advance more. Would you place it in that category somewhere? Not really, too early to tell.
So you mean AI is like an evolving technology that's going to improve? Would I place it into that, or
Would you, as something that is going to change the course of humanity, like planes did, like the
mm,
printing press did, like the internet has done over the last 3 decades?
mhm. So you're yeah. Let me
And you,
think
you could
about
say
that.
it may be too early to tell, or you don't know, and that's totally fine. But I'm just obviously, as someone who works in this area every day, I was just curious.
Yeah, the thing is that my opinion on this I think changes by the week or sometimes by
Yeah,
the hour. So I'm trying to think about where am I at right now with that question. So I used to be very cynical in terms of I don't really think it's going to have a broad impact. But we've seen a lot of embracing of this technology and a lot of competition across very, very powerful stakeholders, companies, countries, and this sort of investment is likely to have a very large impact. However, we've also seen a lot of movement on the side of people that aren't in really powerful positions, but are kind of broad in number. And with this interaction, you could also see some advancement. Is this going to be on the scale of like the steam engine leading into like an industrial revolution? Did the internet really create that sort of, yeah, so the internet expanded connectivity across countries. Yeah, it absolutely improved globalization. But you also have things where now a lot of your time is wasted emailing, which actually takes a lot longer to write an email than just to make a call, a phone call. So, in some ways, the technology has advanced convenience. In some ways, it's basically made it so people are, for some reason, just forgetting about old things. Will it has have this form? I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say it's just advanced too slowly. We've had a really nice boom in accessibility, and I think it's gonna kind of persist as a nice tool to increase productivity quite a bit. But without the foresight to harness this increase in productivity to replace tasks so that people are working in an environment that's less stressful, that's more beneficial to them, which I just haven't really seen from the US. I've seen it from Europe and from companies or countries like China. Without that push, I don't think it's going to have a really strong. I think it's going to be very nice. It's going to expand quality of life in some cases, like your ambient listening tool. And for the most part, it's going to just be kind of this technology that's there, has some nice use cases, and doesn't build beyond that. I'm talking about generative AI rather than
Yeah.
what AI is. All technology is what people
Yeah,
refer
yeah.
to as AI. So it's the generative AI, and that's my stance. I don't think it's going to be as revolutionary as people think, and I think it's just going to make some nice improvements in some cases. But what we really need to have that benefit is a restructuring of the day-to-day for people, and really, there's no movement in that regard right now that I've seen. So that's my long and short take of it.
Yeah. No, that kind of makes me, I mean, I fit right into that, started working in the last 10-year group, so maybe I'm biased from that perspective, but it kind of makes me happy, right? Like I want tools that make my life easier, better, more efficient. It'd be
Mhm.
nice to obviously have things like DeepMind with drug discoveries and making, finding cures for various diseases, but do I want to like go to a hospital and like have a bunch of Tesla droids doing everything? And when
Yeah.
I'm 80, no, I don't. So that answer kind of gives me a little bit of hope on that end. Has there been anything that we haven't touched on or that I didn't ask or things that you think we should kind of talk more about or you think we covered it mostly?
So I'm really interested from your perspective in terms of like AI ethics education you've had, or if anyone's talked to you about these things like transparency and using AI for recommendations for what would you call it? Like how you treat patients. It's not called
Yeah.
pathology, right? Is it pathology? That's
Yeah, yeah, diagnosis and treatment and
okay.
yeah, all of that. Yeah.
Um,
Not really, no. So and I think the funny thing is that like amongst the hospital that I work in, for example, I'm probably in my group like the most like into technology, into AI tools. When this ambient kind of tool came up, I was like the first one on the waiting list, and then some folks saw me using it, and they're like, "Oh, what's this?" And then they kind of got onboarded because of me. And so that's not saying that I'm like really smart or whatnot. I'm just like more into it than others. And I think the average kind of consensus amongst I can only speak from experience amongst people that I interact with in healthcare, the hospital, other colleagues is that they don't really, know about a lot of these tools. And it's like, hey, if the hospital releases something and makes you do it or makes it like a mandatory thing, they'll do it. And so, for example, medical schools just now are barely trying to a lot of them, like obviously your Harvards and Stanfords, they've had an AI and healthcare curriculum probably for a few years now. But you go to your, average state medical school, they probably still don't have that. They're probably
hmm.
just now starting to think, hey, how do we integrate that? The state medical organizations, Texas Medical Association, Texas College of Emergency Physicians, I'm on all of their email lists and CME seminars and whatnot. I personally haven't seen a lot of lectures and CME courses being offered around these technologies. Funny thing, like there was like an open call for presentations at one of these meetings. I was like, hey, I'd love to like talk about some of these like practical AI ambient type things. And they're like, oh yeah, we've been looking for someone like that. And yeah, please come and talk about this. And once again, am I the best person to talk about it? There's probably a million other people more qualified, but the fact is that most people in healthcare just aren't that interested in it. They're kind of involved in that daily grind of, seeing patients, working your shifts and whatnot. And so it is obviously a lot of work to kind of learn about these things and you have to have some kind of baseline interest. And so when you talk about the ethical implications of like implementing these things and like what type of data sets are fed into them, and like you kind of mentioned, right, if you give the characteristics and data of like a million white 40-year old white men, then obviously those treatments are going to be geared towards what's best for that group. And maybe a
Mhm.
20-year-old black female is not going to get the best treatment um, options from that. Now, as clinicians, I personally think we need to make sure that we know about those biases. We push back on hospital systems and pharmaceutical companies and ask them, like, hey, what kind of data are you using to train
Mhm.
these tools? What kind of patients are enrolled in these studies and things of that nature? And that's something I want to see expand, where physicians do kind of take this technology as something that's new and that could be helpful, but also could have a lot of the same pitfalls that our healthcare system has had for hundreds of years. And
Mhm.
yeah, that's definitely something that I want to see expanded. But unfortunately, no, I haven't seen any
Mhm.
training or anything coming down from our governing organizations.
So your story actually highlighted exactly why I brought up this topic. So your community, your work community, really benefited from you being an early adopter of this technology and then showcasing its benefits and helping peers adapt, right?
Yeah,
You're not likely to see that in areas where you don't really have a lot of technology. There's a lot of hospitals that are kind of out away from major cities that just they barely even have computers. And so they're not really able to jump on board and benefit from this technology. The thing that really concerns me right now is, are we creating additional barriers to entries that people that come from impoverished areas will have to face to get into a very lucrative career like being a doctor? The other concern, and this is something that's kind of well known with these ambient listening technologies, is what is the training set for that tool to develop and improve itself? It's going to be trained on people that have maybe specific dialogues. They don't maybe have like Southern dialogues or maybe non-English first language dialogues. And when one of them tries to use this tool, maybe it has less benefit, and this prohibits it from being used by them and them giving their data, unstructured data, their experience using the tool to train it and improve it for their needs to it. And then again, expanding barriers to entry for others to kind of push into these fields. So there's a lot of examples of this where you are potentially decreasing equity, decreasing equality and opportunities because these tools are really being adopted by people that not necessarily are privileged, but that aren't representative of the full population, given just what's the word to say for it? The socioeconomic state of not just our country, but countries around the world. So this could be a concern going forward. And I mean, from your perspective, there's no real reason not to use a tool. It's from someone like my perspective, where I have to study and warn people about this potential problem. And this is not an issue that we'll see have an effect until like 10, 20 years from now. So it's
yeah,
something that can be problematic. But this is why I was also asking about the AI ethics. I know a good friend of mine, he was director of AI at the American Heart Association. So they just got a very large grant to study AI health equity there. And he's a really big advocate for. And there are a lot of hospitals with no real resources, and they're just missing out on this wave that's going to let everyone get even further ahead. So we really want to spread out these benefits. But we haven't seen much effort to it. So yeah, maybe having someone like you share your experience in these other areas or broadly as you're doing through a podcast, through outreach, is going to be really helpful to fight this potential. So I'm really glad to see it, and I was really happy to participate. So thank you for
yeah. No, I
inviting
hope so.
me.
I hope so. That's the goal of these. Like I'm a really curious person, so getting to chat with like an expert like you is just like it makes me exciting. It's the best part of my day today. But then hopefully others listen to it and see clips from it, and they learn like, oh, this guy's just like a normal ER doc who, is like interested in these things. He didn't like get some fancy like technology degree or whatnot, and hopefully they learn about these technologies through that avenue. But yeah, definitely things that we need to keep front and center, making sure that we don't worsen things because we got this shiny new thing and actually make the lives of as many people better as possible. And thanks so much for willing to share a part of your day with me. And I hope it's a conversation we keep going.
Absolutely.